Letting Total War die is a choice, and saving it is easy. I say "and" instead of "but", by the way, because it implies that it doesn't have to be difficult to do so, and that the current deteriorating situation is fully the result of bad choices rather than inherent declining interest in the series. After all, the outpour of outrage from the community in several ways, either by letting their voices be heard here on YouTube or on the forums, or simply by not showing up for and buying Total War Pharaoh, actually proves the opposite of what people might think at first glance. Because if nobody cared about Total War, why would we bother talking about it? In fact, it seems we're doing more than just talking about it. A few weeks ago, something happened on social media that kind of took the world by storm. It seems that men in particular spends a whole lot of time thinking about the Roman Empire for whatever reason, and I found myself personally targeted here. I decided to ask the same question to my albeit highly biased audience, in an admittedly highly sham poll. But nevertheless, I think the answers speak for themselves, even if it's all just a meme. This whole "think about Rome" meme does however line up with my own experience, and I believe it too integrates well with the Total War community as a whole. Because if the original Rome is not beloved enough, Rome 2 remains by far the most played historical Total War game to this day. The reason I'm here today is to tell both you, the player, and Creative Assembly what needs to be done, regardless of the era or setting the next Total War finds itself in. And I'm dividing these golden ticket ideas into 4 sections, because I believe they are that fundamental and that good. As always, if you have yet to subscribe to the channel but enjoy my videos, I hope you'll take that 1 second to click the sub button and join to fight the good fight. Another fight worth fighting is the fight for good in Honkai Star Rail, a new multi-platform galactic fantasy RPG that just received a massive update. Honkai Star Rail is a free cross-platform RPG available on both PC, mobile, and PS5, and in version 1.5, you'll be experiencing an all-new story in Belobog. With more than 80 million downloads in just 6 months, you'll assume the role of a trailblazer, immersing yourself in an adventure filled with amazing animations and fantastic music. Honkai Star Rail's turn-based combat system is easy to pick up, but highly tactical, and with over 20 charming playable characters and their stories, you'll be uncovering the secrets and puzzles of this rich semi-open world in style. In this new update, Honkai Star Rail introduces new 5-star heroes and characters. Huohuo is a charming girl with a unique tale that seemingly has a mind of its own, and is a wind-type support character on the path of abundance to help her teammates. Argenti is also new, a chivalrous gentleman with physical and powerful AoE attacks on the path of erudition. It's all very stylish, isn't it? Especially when he makes good use of his spear. This latest version 1.5 further updates the story of the mysterious city of Belobog, with ghost-busting missions. We'll get a whole new map with the Fixer Gardens, and Silverwool from the Stellaron Hunters returns for players to pull. Log into Honkai Star Rail for 7 days to claim 10 Star Rail special passes for free and try to draw Huohuo or Argenti. Make sure to download Honkai Star Rail now by using the link in the description below and use the redemption code to redeem 50 Stellar Jade. Thank you so much to Hoyoverse for sponsoring this video. Golden ticket idea number 1. Don't reinvent the wheel. In other words, use what works for the player and take it with you. Honestly, this shouldn't even need to be said, because it's so obvious that this is how you build a good product over time, and CA has proved that it's capable of doing this many times, but sadly, in the past 10 years, kind of often completely forgotten. And I'll show you what I mean. My biggest complaint with Creative Assembly, and this is something I kind of knew was happening but couldn't really put into words before recently, is that they seem unable to consistently bring their best features with them into new titles. This means that what you might grow to love in the first or second or third Total War game you play is actually unlikely to make it into the next one. To demonstrate, I'll show you features from every game that would have made a 2023 Total War the ultimate Total War game instead of what we got. And this time, I'll do it backwards, beginning with even their latest game, Total War Pharaoh. There are at least 2 uniquely awesome features in Pharaoh I wish to mention here, and that is first the caravan system locked behind the royal tradition system. In this mechanic, you can load up trade cards with resources you natively produce and send them across the world to trade for foreign resources, and then send the caravan back home to reap the rewards. It's a system that definitely could use even more work, but the core feature here is sound, and it actually feels awesome to have a physical or manual say in the trading relations of your empire that's even deeper than similar caravan systems we have seen before. Second is the detailed campaign customization, allowing you to tailor the experience to your liking much more than before. While I personally don't feel it necessarily has the biggest impact right now, and would like to see even more aspects added, I think it's a good foundation for future expansions of this feature. Next on our list is Warhammer 3. Warhammer 3 does admittedly not maybe do any one particular new thing compared to the previous Warhammer games other than continue the style of gameplay and faction mechanics, but it did massively innovate in one particular area, and that is Total War's multiplayer scene. You see, what Warhammer 3 did was that it finally changed up the series' 12-year-old multiplayer campaign system, and finally allowed for 8-player simultaneous multiplayer campaigns. The fact that it's taken this long is one thing, but the other fact, namely that this feature didn't even make it into the very next game in Pharaoh, is just appalling. It adds so much fun and so many new opportunities to the series that frankly should have been there all along, and is in my opinion the single best feature of Warhammer 3 that needs to make it into every single future Total War game. I mean, can you imagine playing Empire Total War with 8 players? I can, and it makes me depressed that I can't. Troy, the perhaps not so wonder boy, did at least introduce one awesome thing, and that was to divide your faction's treasury into resources and not just money. In Troy, you actually have to gather food, wood, stone, bronze, and gold, and then use them for specific purposes. Certain buildings will only allow you to build them if you have the right materials, and the same goes for the recruitment of units. The system isn't perfect, and a regular and deeper trade system could certainly enhance this foundation further, meaning that you actually need horses in your country to actually be able to recruit cavalry units, but it was a cool innovation, and the reliance on resources like these to raise specific soldiers and equipment is something Total War definitely needs to continue into its next generation of games. Total War 3 Kingdoms, where to begin? Well, if I once again had to mention one thing, it would without a doubt be the diplomacy feature. And if I had to say one thing about this one, it would be that CA massively failed to deliver on bringing the one feature everyone agreed was the best thing to come out of Total War in God knows how long, the deep diplomacy of 3 Kingdoms. Diplomacy has always been a sore spot for Total War, seeing as it's mostly unreliable or just downright broken. But in 3 Kingdoms, we actually got meaningful diplomatic options, a host of them actually, in a system that more than ever gave us that paradox-esque range of choices in how to deal with our enemies and allies. Literally, perhaps never before have I seen a bigger failure from CA than the missed opportunity and choice of somehow not bringing 3 Kingdoms diplomacy further and not making it the new standard for how all Total War diplomacy should be conducted. They did admittedly bring a numbered system into the series rather than the more vague chance of acceptance system we had earlier, but these are tiny pickings compared to what should have been done. Thrones of Britannia, the game I wanted to love, but being built in the Atella engine, it just never stood a chance really. What's here isn't necessarily so bad though, and I want to single out one specific feature, namely the system of mustering, which completely changes the pacing of racing armies. In every Total War game before and after this, except for ironically 3K which came directly after, units are completely raced in a matter of turns, giving a full regiment of soldiers right away. But in Thrones, a base portion of the full unit is raced immediately and then mustered over time until the complete regiment is present. This feels so much more immersive and realistic, and actually prevents massive armies to be raced in a matter of a single turn or two. In fact, this could have been made even more impactful by complementing it with a mercenary system, which Thrones of Britannia sadly lacks. Because imagine this, while regular soldiers need to be mustered, complete and ready for battle mercenary regiments could be hired immediately, albeit at a much higher cost. This would cement the difference between regular soldiers and mercs more than ever, but nevertheless, this system of mustering is uniquely awesome. I also want to point out that Thrones actually finally made good use of the food system Total War has had since 2011. Depending on your amount of food, your faction receives various bonuses or debuffs, which is much more meaningful and immersive than what was there before. For sake of ease and time, I'll join Warhammer 1 and 2 together here, since they're so similar in mechanics. But what made Warhammer so different in a positive way, perhaps even the only truly positive way for the foundations of Total War, was the introduction of truly unique faction mechanics. No longer did units or geography play the most vital role in differentiating between factions, but we actually got unique features tailor-made for each and every one of them now, meaning there is a certain feeling of exclusivity linked to them. Ironically, this is one of the only features that's consistently made it into basically every single game since. It's a good thing, of course, as long as it doesn't come at the expense of other mechanics, which it might have kinda inadvertently done. Of course, Warhammer did one more thing that Total War should have learned from already, namely having a long-term plan that came together in the Mortal and then Immortal Empires campaigns. What CA did here was genius, making 3 games that complemented each other only to join them into one and the same campaign after it was all over, making for one grand battle royale unlike any other. But the first and obvious time CA had the chance to do this with its historical titles, at least announcing the possibility of it, they did not. Troy and Pharaoh could have joined together in an immortal Bronze Age Empires campaign, but they haven't as of yet. And honestly, even if such a campaign were to be announced, I'm kind of afraid it would be too late by now. Either way, no matter the time period of the actual next grand historical game, CA should consider doing the same, joining together various regions and perhaps even eras with each game, for it all to end up with one massive campaign spanning most of the world or even millennia of game time. And then we come to perhaps the greatest Total War game when adjusted for time, Total War Attila. And I'll tell you exactly which features should have been brought forward. Manually selected governors of provinces, a more meaningful family tree system than ever before, region fertility where each region is more or less suited for farming, which is just so awesome, and topping it all with both general and even army loyalty, meaning you have to watch out for mutinies and generals going rogue and contesting your leadership. Governorships like the ones in Attila is the first time Total War has actually featured governors, and I don't know why it never returned in the same way. Could it have been expanded upon? Sure. Should it have been retrofitted back into Rome 2? Why, of course! But most of all, it should have been brought into every Total War to come, since having governors of provinces or just individual cities is something that every single kingdom in existence have had in one way or another, and it really does make for increased immersion in empire management. Attila is just so jam-packed with awesome stuff like this, and I could go into each one of these so much more, but I think the features speak for themselves honestly, and the fact that every single one of these were lost in the direct sequel, namely Warhammer 1, is just downright terrible. Rome 2 has a few amazing new features as well, back in 2013. The ability to conduct amphibious assaults, essentially combining naval battles with land or siege battles, is fantastic and makes for grand spectacles. It was only really replicated in its standalone expansion Attila and Thrones of Britannia, I guess, before being completely lost to time, which is just such a crime. Second is the great feature of being able to actually change government types, meaning you can begin as a tribal, republican, or kingdom type faction, and then switch to becoming an empire or any of the other types depending on the situation and requirements. I also enjoyed the political feature of rivaling parties governing different provinces depending on their power. Although it definitely could use some improvement, the feature itself is great as a concept, and combined, these aspects of Rome 2 really do make the game stand out, and should have been made integral parts of the series. Shogun 2 didn't necessarily do a lot of groundbreaking stuff for the Total War series in terms of main features, but it did do something, and even though it's a bit obscure, it did implement the Avatar Conquest feature, which essentially offers a simplified campaign structure, but with enhanced and fun features related to unit and general customization, and a fun way to play the campaign and unlock new units, almost like a board game version of Total War with intact battles. There were plans to implement this again in Rome 2, but of course they were scrapped. If it had made it into Rome 2, which was a lot more popular than Shogun 2, I think it could have lived a long and happy life, even as an awesome simplified multiplayer feature. But alas, CA decided to cut Shogun 2's most unique feature of them all. Of course, my personal favorite feature was found in Fall of the Samurai, namely the ability of warships to bombard enemies on land. While it is understandable that Rome 2 didn't have a land bombardment feature, it still could have had a type of one. Naval ships with catapults could have helped to weaken a coastline settlement's city walls before an assault, for example, which would have been a great tactical feature to have. As a standalone expansion to Empire, Napoleon Total War didn't necessarily do all that much new or different, but it did focus heavily on one part of historical immersion that almost no Total War game does: historical buildings. Napoleon is for all intents and purposes the only historical Total War game where historical buildings stand front and center, introducing things like the Triumphal Arch to Paris and various similar buildings for the other factions. The fact that we have to rely on mods for historical monuments and buildings like these in virtually every other game is actually super cringe and needs to be a top priority in future titles, because it actually makes every faction and city feel that much more unique, especially if you can see them on the campaign map as well. Now, Empire is another case entirely, since this one was the first of its kind. Empire introduced two main features I believe should have become mainstays in one form or another in every Total War game to come. The first of these is an obvious one: the all-important naval battles. Naval battles revolutionized Total War forever because it opened up a completely new theater of war. It certainly made Empire itself legendary in the series, and it's one of the few things that games like Rome 2 has over Rome 1. Since naval warfare was so important to so many empires in history, it's a double shame that this feature has basically become lost to time in the past decade, and I for one need it back. Second is the Empire approach to the province system. While I will not talk about changes to our city's construction options, Empire added small towns outside the main settlements. These did two things. They made the population system feel important, because towns actually grew as time went on, meaning a map in 1700 looked very different than an Empire campaign in 1790. It remains a refreshing change, and I abhor that we haven't seen this make a return in the same fashion ever since. The second thing this town system did was make the map feel more alive. By virtue of having so many smaller settlements scattered across the map, armies could interact with and fight over them on their way to the enemy's larger cities. And in this way, Empire's campaign map felt so much more organic than any other Total War because of it. As an added bonus, Empire even let you place units on forts and make these forts yourself, who could then utilize the cannons on that fort to shoot down enemies, which is just such a great touch, and units could even enter buildings to have defensive positions to fight from. But of course, there's nothing interactive like this in the later games really. Medieval 2, the old legend. While borrowing a ton of features from Rome, Medieval 2 did invent a few golden nuggets on its own. Being able to see exactly how many prisoners you took during battle and then getting to choose exactly what to do with them was major and felt a lot more organic than what appears like a mostly random or disjointed post-battle spoils of victory screen these days. Medieval 2 Kingdoms introduced permanent stone forts, allowing you to set down forts as you went and actually having them remain in place, even with no garrison, which much like the towns of Empire, made the map feel so much more alive and moldable, since it allowed the player to actually add physical objects to it, and create strongholds at important locations. Medieval 2 perfected Total War's use of a number of era-defining events and new factions, making it feel terrifying when the Mongols emerged from the east, when Grand Crusades were called, or when America was discovered. These events all had their own unique videos too, but in the later games, these same impactful events and the effort put in just aren't present really, even though we have certain games that do harken back to it, like the events of Shogun 2 or Attila. What made Medieval 2 feel a bit more special was that it divided its cities in two, economy-focused cities like usual and military-focused castles. In an age where castles are generally seen as a signifier of the era, it's certainly a really cool aspect, and I think later games could have introduced similar town types where armies received benefits from being stationed there. Empire, of course, did mostly exactly what Medieval 2 did in this regard, although it's not as cool without castles and the freedom of building Medieval 2 offered. But perhaps the awesome crowning achievement of Medieval 2 was the unit upgrades and how outfitting your units with better armor actually made a visual difference on the battlefield. This was never replicated again, but quickly became a universally beloved feature, and I don't know why we haven't seen something similar happen ever again. As a bonus, Medieval 2 Kingdoms is the only Total War game to ever offer official hot seat support, meaning multiplayer campaigns on the same computer, which in my opinion is a massive shame. And finally, Rome Total War became legendary for a whole lot of reasons when it came out back in 2004, but it remains legendary because of its astounding feature set. There are honestly too many features in Rome to mention every single one, so I'll mention a few standout features. First, and the singular most important feature of Rome, is the design of the city and building system. Based on a philosophy of roleplay and freedom, Rome allowed us to build every building in every settlement when you wanted to depending on the city's tier, meaning we had no building slots that artificially limited construction. Second, we had a population system that determined how big the cities were and which buildings were available to us, and we could even simulate migration by recruiting units in one city, lowering the population in that city, and disbanding them in another, increasing the population by the same number elsewhere. Rome had general speeches, completely unique faction intros, it had awesome and varied unit formations that mattered, from testudos to phalanxes to Calabrian circles, had units actually pushing battery rams, and guess what? Even after the ram had destroyed the gate, it didn't just yeet out of the world, but you could use it even more to take down additional parts of the enemy wall. You needed to maintain your siege weapons to actually be able to siege a city without just hammering away at the giant gates, and to get anywhere across the ocean, you actually needed to recruit a flipping navy to transport you and keep you safe. Rome Total War let you inspect your cities in peacetime to enjoy your creations, and Rome, through barbarian invasion, implemented awesome horde factions that could traverse the world as pure armies and settle when you wanted to. This mechanic was actually made even better in Attila with actual horde encampments, by the way, which is a very nice and rare improvement on Rome itself. But Rome BI also had an awesome religious system where the population of your settlement was made up of various faiths, influenced by both the faction leader, the official faith in the city determined by the church or temple there, neighboring regions, and even the reigning governor. And when factions rebelled from one of the Roman empires, they didn't just turn into generic rebels, but actually made new Roman factions, which again, Attila also managed to portray really well. I also want to mention two final cherries on top here, but still massively important aspects. First is everything going on in this map, like roads, trade lanes, and the movement of ships and trade carts, which are for all intents and purposes completely gone in games like Warhammer 3 and Total War Pharaoh. They add so much charm to the entire experience, and of course, being able to build your own roads is something I value highly, but which was completely removed from the game since at least Rome 2. And lastly, we have the soundtrack, which in my opinion, when factoring in both the battles and the campaign, might just be undefeated in Rome Total War. These were a ton of features, but they are all there and easy to both see and remember if you happen to be a Total War veteran and a lover of both the series and the genre. While some of the features might sound like they belong uniquely to one or some of the games, I don't think that's true that often. For example, Rome or Attila's Horde factions could easily be used similarly for Native Americans in an Empire 2, or even for rebels or revolutionaries wherever they reside in the world. Attila's governor system could easily be converted into a title system in Medieval 3, or indeed a governor or lord system in Empire 2, and on we go. As such, the message is clear. Each of these features are amazing, and all Creative Assembly have to do is reuse them, remember that they exist, and improve upon them where possible. Reinventing the wheel really isn't necessary if the wheel already works wonders and is beloved after all. Golden idea number 2. If you really don't want to invest in a completely new game, then just remaster an old one and add new features, updates, and expansions to them. I am completely serious about this, and I need CA to take a page from the Book of Age of Empires here, or even Stronghold Definitive Edition for that matter. Imagine for a moment, if you will, that Creative Assembly remastered Empire Total War. Now Empire is already a good-looking game, made even more gorgeous in Napoleon. In other words, I believe Empire Remastered would be able to look like a modern game even today because the base tech used here was so revolutionary all those years ago. Empire Remastered would absolutely look the part then, of that I have no doubt. But more than that, what CA could do is just expand upon and make Empire what it was always meant to be. Create that Holy Roman Empire and succession system you originally wanted to. Add the family and intermarriage mechanics we were meant to have. Fix the bugs, improve the AI and the pathfinding, implement more events, make more diverse cities and sieges on the battle maps, and even add to the campaign map by including more parts of the world, more units, more factions, more cities, and for the love of God, adding an 8-player multiplayer campaign. By just brainstorming, we figured out how to create perhaps the most perfect Total War game out there without even needing to invest in a completely new engine at all. The same could honestly be said for any of the past Total War games in the past 17 years, including a Medieval 2 Remastered, a Rome 2 Remastered, or even an Attila Remastered, the latter which severely needs a few updates and fixes anyway. I'm not sitting here and telling you I'd inherently rather have a remastered game than completely new ones, but if it came with more years of support, a modernization of these old titles, and objective improvements of what could have or already are amazing games, honestly just the idea gets me hyped, and I think a lot of players would flock to these titles because they already know and love them and want more content and patches for them. I sincerely hope CA didn't take the wrong lessons from Rome Remastered, because that game probably didn't do as well as they'd hoped. Thing is though, Rome is such an old game by now, and even though I love it to death, I can understand why certain animations or aspects of that game can appear kinda clunky to a newer audience. In this way, literally any Total War game after, beginning with Medieval 2 and Empire, would fare so much better with remastered versions, since they already then felt like much more modern games because of the engine upgrades. In other words, CA, if you're not willing or unable to create something completely new, I bet a lot of players would love remastered and supported titles of their older beloved games, especially if you also implement new and improved multiplayer modes to improve the competitive and collaborative online scene that Total War really craves. Golden idea number 3. Do your proper market research. I've said this a few times by now, but I find it hard to believe that any company in the world has an easier time of market research as Creative Assembly does, since the fans are literally telling you exactly what they want from your series and have done so ever since the series launch. There are very specific titles the fans crave more than others, and these are Medieval 3, Empire 2, and Rome 3. I'd be willing to bet no other titles come close to these 3. And even though that doesn't mean you have to make these in succession, it does suggest that you should have considered making them sometime in the past 10 years, and certainly in the next 2. There are definitely other time periods out there people would be interested in, probably just a few centuries apart from the ones mentioned here honestly, but to compare, I believe nobody, if only perhaps 5% of the community, truly asked for the Bronze Age titles of Troy and Pharaoh. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to make them, nor that you shouldn't be able to make them for yourself, since obviously having passion for the products you make is extremely important. But I think it does suggest again that if you want the fans to be happy, and if you want your games to sell and have long lives, then you should at least try or even consider making something they've explicitly said they've longed for now and then, or at least make sure that they know you're working on it, especially if the mood sours and people are becoming disillusioned with the franchise. And finally, golden idea number 4, CA, make your voice heard. Speak to the community in engaging ways, and not just through press statements or hyper-official channels. An easy way to win back the faith and support of the people is to engage openly and honestly, to talk about your current situation and future plans, and to not just sit high and mighty and wait for the storm to pass, because it just doesn't work, especially with an audience as passionate and as loving of this series as they are. In the end, I believe Total War could and still can have a prospering future. It just demands that CA turns around and changes how they design their games and their approach to dealing with the community. And you know, I honestly don't think that's so hard when it comes down to it. But what do you think? Do you agree that these are golden ticket ideas? That CA actually has easy choices to make and paths open to them here? Or is it more complicated than that? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, I really hope you leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!